Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, the impact of climate change on Hawaii. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahealani Richardson. Warmer temperatures, rising sea levels, and stormier weather. Just a few effects of climate change scientists say we're starting to experience in Hawaii and across the Pacific. What can we expect in years to come? How do we translate research into action to combat and adapt to climate change? And what can we learn from other Pacific islands where climate change has already taken a toll? Tonight on Insights, the impact of climate change on Hawaii. We want to hear from you during tonight's show. Call 973-1000 or 1-800-238-4847 if you're calling from a neighbor island. You can also watch Insights streamed live at pbshawaii.org. Just click on the title of tonight's show or find us on Twitter at PBS Hawaii. Tonight we welcome Chip Fletcher. He is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs for the UH School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology. As a climate change scientist, Dr. Fletcher has conducted extensive ongoing investigations into the impact of climate change on Hawaii. His research shows that rising sea levels and stronger storms will increase coastal flooding and erosion. Victoria Keener is a research fellow at the East-West Center and part of a team of scientists researching our vulnerability to climate change. One of Dr. Keener's goals is to help policymakers understand the research so that they can create laws and policies to help mitigate the impacts of climate change in Hawaii. Bob Stanfield is an urban planner with the Honolulu Department of Planning and Permitting. It's the agency of charge of city building codes and infrastructure requirements. Mr. Stanfield has helped represent Honolulu at the state level in discussions about climate change and its impacts on the islands. And Jim Lyon is the CEO and owner of Lyon Associates, a local civil and technical engineering company that's been exploring the challenges posed by sea level rise and climate change. The company also created a series of films documenting the impact of climate change on island nations such as Micronesia. And in 2015, the company started a training division to help communities prepare for the changes that they could experience due to climate change. Thank you all for coming here tonight and being with us tonight.
Thanks.
Chip, I wanted to start off with you first and explain what you're seeing in your research.
Well, we see a number of things. One is the prevalence of chronic erosion on our shorelines. We've studied Kauai, Maui, and Oahu, and we find that 70% of the beaches on these islands are experiencing year after year chronic erosion. In some locations, such as the North Shore of Maui and on the Kihei coast, the percentage of beach that's eroding gets up beyond 90% of the beach. Part of this is related to sea level rise, and our modeling shows that future sea level rise, based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projections, as you said, on the order of 1 to 3 feet of additional sea level rise going through this century, has the potential to inundate the front block or two of development of our coastal communities. We also see that the groundwater table will rise behind our communities or behind the coast, and this will create flooding in a number of ways. The water table will break through the land and make new wetlands on areas that are currently dry land. And also sea level will flood up into our drainage system so that when it rains, there's no place for the rain to drain off the land. So flooding is an appropriate name for the effects of sea level rise, and between flooding and erosion, we have some very serious impacts that are likely to hit our communities.
Victoria, you know, a lot of people have seen these models where you see the water inundating areas like Waikiki, Lanikai, and other coastal areas. What's been the reaction as you talk to policymakers when they start learning more about the data?
Yeah, in Hawaii, we have a lot of policymakers that are very interested in understanding that data at a policy level, really how to get it into planning, into documents and adaptation plans. So what we really try and do is provide a link to translate that data from the people doing the science, the hard science in the labs, into a form that people can understand and work with in their day-to-day operations and the practical work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And what's the difference between global warming and climate change in your view?
So global warming refers to, on average, the entire temperature rise over time of the Earth, but climate change refers to all of the different things that are going on. So we see the temperature rising in some places. We see precipitation patterns changing. We see wind and wave patterns changing. Droughts hitting more in some places, flooding hitting more in other places. So it's really a collection of those impacts.
Jim, you've spent time actually traveling through atolls and islands within Micronesia, and you've created a series of films called Vanishing Island. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So we've been traveling extensively into Micronesia for the past decade, and in the last couple of years we've always heard stories of people on atolls saying the atolls are changing, they don't have water to drink, they're having droughts, they can't grow their taro. So we decided to visit a bunch of these atolls and confirm that these are the problems. And so the issue is, as the atolls lose land, sea level rises, you can't get fresh drinking water, you can't grow your own food, where are they going to go?
And let's take a look at a little clip of this film, and it's pretty stark in what we're going to see. Let's take a look.
There are bigger problems that need to be dealt with for survival today. Fresh water is a serious problem. Almost all of the underground wells have been destroyed by seawater intrusion. They rely on capturing rainwater from their roofs and storing it in these large plastic water tanks. But the droughts on these islands are becoming more frequent and longer, and more storage capacity is needed.
When I was young, I remember that we used to drink the water from the well, and right now we need to boil it, because you can see, if you boil the water, you can see a little bit salt inside the pot.
The next issue for them is their food security. They are reliant on the food they grow themselves: breadfruit, coconut, banana, and most importantly, their staple, taro. The taro crops are being wiped out at an alarming rate due to saltwater inundation. One island we visited, 80% of the taro has been permanently destroyed.
Before, our taro patch is really good, but these days it's really getting worse. Lots of taros are dying, and some people, their taros is not enough to feed the family.
Some of the place for the taro patch, now it's gone. It's totally destroyed from the sea.
Oh, that's our food. If we don't have taro here, we'll die. No more food for the people of the.
So what does this all mean? There are 30,000 Micronesians living on these low-lying atolls, and many of them are children. In their lifetimes, they will see their islands wash away, have periods of drought and no fresh water to drink, and continued devastation of their food crops. If this continues, these children will be forced to leave their ancestral lands and become climate refugees.
And what you just saw was a clip from Vanishing Islands produced by Jim Lyon. Jim, the really interesting thing about this documentary is that it provides a face to what scientists have been talking about for a long time. What was the reaction that you saw when people started to see these films?
Many people were just amazed at how you could live on a pile of sand in the middle of the ocean. You know, you have atolls with 100 people, you have atolls with 2,000 people. So I think a lot of the people that commented on it, especially from Hawaii, we live on a beautiful rock island. But if you're living on a sand island, it's a completely different way of looking at the world. So we noticed a lot of people just were curious as to why people would live there. But that's their land, that's their home, that's all they know, you know. So it's not like they can just pick up and move anywhere else.
And you talk about these climate change refugees. Where are they going, and are any of them coming to Hawaii now?
Yes, so the goal was, for some people, it's to get off the sand atoll, then go to a rock island. In Micronesia, there are 4 large rock islands, kind of like the size of Kauai. And so you have a migration outward into the rock islands. In the Marshall Islands, there are no rock islands. They have 25 atolls, elevation 10 feet above sea level. So where are they going to go? And Marshall Islands is a 5-hour flight to Oahu. So you see a lot of migration, a lot of moving around, but for many people, their land is their land. see any plans in moving, which is a little scary as far as the future.
Yeah, Bob Stanfield, something, looking forward into the future, this could well be happening in Hawaii decades from now, correct?
Well, it's happening in Hawaii right now. The sea level rise is rising. I think CHIP's research and findings by other agencies show that sea level rise has been occurring and that it's speeding up in Hawaii. And our question is, as a community, what is the prudent thing to do given these projections of this level of sea level rise? It's happening slowly, and that's probably the most difficult thing for government to deal with, is a slowly increasing risk. But there is agreement at all three levels of government, the federal government, the state government, and our city government all agree that climate change is real. And the mayor said it needs to be addressed in our plans and in our rules and regulations. We have begun to address it in our plans since 2011. We've adopted policies in 3 of our plans and are proposing addition of these policies that we call no-risk climate adaptation policies. And going forward, we need to begin the process of turning those plan policies and guidelines into rules, regulations, and standards. A fellow named Gary Chalk, who's a structural engineer, with help from the state, has prepared a recommendation that's still in draft form about how we might implement climate change adaptation standards and rules into our code. So that's something that's happening. And there are opportunities for your viewers, for people who have a stake in these things, to participate in that process of deciding what needs to be done.
Now, Victoria, you look at the political landscape. Before the show, we were talking about you were studying and working in Florida, and now you're working here. What's been the difference in terms of reaction to climate change and the data and what the scientists are saying?
Well, we worked with, or I've had the opportunity to work with a wide variety of stakeholders in different sectors, ranging from agriculture to water utilities, planners, people in government at the state and county and local level. And in Florida, we found a lot of the time that we would have to put climate change impacts in terms of extremes. So asking people how they respond to drought instead of specifically talking about climate change, but just recognizing that these are patterns that people are going to see over and over and might see more in the future, having them remember times in the past where they had to experience drought and what they had to do, or flood events, things like that. In Hawaii, it's been a much more open conversation than in Florida, just because a lot of the political climate. We have a lot more interest at the government level, at the private level from citizens. People are a lot more open to discussing adaptation and are past accepting the science and are on to what are we going to do about it.
What do you think were the impacts of this recent conference in Paris, where you had world leaders talking about climate change?
I think everyone was very impressed, or surprised and impressed that everybody came together at the end and were able to get a binding agreement. Out of the talks, a lot of people were skeptical that something would be signed and binding at the end, and to have everybody come together and agree on 2 degrees Celsius limit warming by the end of the century or less. Ideally, the islands were actually very active in advocating for a 1.5 degree limit. Overall, the amount of commitments, I believe, that came in from the different countries at this point make about half of what would be needed in carbon cuts and emissions to get to the 2 degree, to limit to the 2 degree warming. But with that, they're reassessing every 5 years to look at everybody's commitments, but at a country level. So they're really hoping that people will keep on putting more commitments in as time goes on, and we'll get to that limit or below 2 degrees.
Chip Fletcher, going back to the politics of it all, is there really agreement by scientists that this is happening?
Oh, yes, most definitely. There have been a number of studies that have shown there's percentages in the upper 90s, 97%, 98% of scientists that have published on the problem of climate change are in agreement that It is a result of human production of greenhouse gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. It is a serious issue. If climate change is allowed to continue beyond 2 degrees C up to 3 or 4 degrees C, it can become an existential issue. A recent paper just came out documenting that at 6 degrees centigrade above historic levels of temperature, the phytoplankton in the ocean that produce through photosynthesis most of the oxygen that we breathe lose their ability to conduct photosynthesis. In other words, there's a real threat to the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere that all life depends on. The idea that there's a debate about climate change is promulgated by those who want to deny the science for typically political reasons or whatever their personal viewpoint of the world is, because they can't see that the facts of climate change would lead to certain sociological and political and economic changes in order to counteract climate change. And they can't accept, because of their worldview, what these changes would require.
Bob Stanfield, we have a really interesting question via Twitter, and someone wants to know, will Hawaii be ready when the world's temperature rises 2 degrees Celsius? What are your thoughts?
I certainly would hope so. I think everybody at the table and many in the community want to respond to this in the same way that we would respond to any change in the hazards that we're facing. So it's our intent to reach out to the community and try to find the solutions that would address this. It really is a challenge for us. I'd like to point out, just as an addition to the comments about Paris, even if we are able to hold the change to 2 degrees, that still means that there's going to be sea level rise for Hawaii, for Honolulu, and that as CHIPS studies have shown in looking at what happens as you go from 1 feet to 2 feet to 3 feet, which might be at the end of the century, 85 years from now, that around that 3-foot level, we start to see significant effects in Waikiki and Kaka'ako in downtown, where major areas would be exposed to either direct flooding from the ocean or a groundwater inundation. So if we think that's our future over the next 85 years, the question to us is, well, how are we going to deal with it? The Dutch, who have set the gold standard for this, have adopted a policy that they call letting the water, making a place for the water. Where's the water going to go? So the question is, if we know that if we don't do anything about it, we're going to have these flooding in these areas, what should we do to deal with that? We need to find some places for the water to go. We need to figure out how to either protect or adapt to or retreat from these water areas. And that's the question that we need to address as a community, and we need to do it in a way that is sustainable, is fair, is legal, is practical, saves the taxpayers money. There's a host of things that we need to do to make that process work.
Jim, how are you helping communities in Micronesia deal with this problem now?
So our focus is mostly on infrastructure. So runways, water lines, sewer lines, roads. And so the runways are mostly built on the reef, right, like Hawaii. So the impacts of the sea level rising on the runway is quite intense. So you have to really build a lot of seawalls and protect all of the runways. So we've been focusing a lot on that aspect.
And these are the same ideas that can be used here in Hawaii?
Sure, Hawaii is on a reef. I think Kauai is on a reef. I think Maui is on a reef. Big Island's not. But all of the reefs that all of the runways on the reefs, we've seen damage, waves breaking over the retaining walls because they're getting old and affecting. One of the runways in the Marshall Islands is actually the freshwater catchment system. So they catch the rain on the runway, and that water, they try to filter it, and that becomes a drinking water. So sometimes when the storms hit, the salt water comes into the runway, and the whole island is out of water. And being on an atoll and not have water is a pretty big deal.
And how do these communities find the resources and funding to pay for projects like this? I mean, these are
Yeah, it's tough.
island-altering projects.
Yeah. The United States government has a long history with this. This would be called the territorial trust territory. So a lot of money from the U.S. is invested in the infrastructure. And right now we're starting to see more and more language viewpoint as to what climate change could impact on the infrastructure. And it's a relatively recent, very recent actually. Just to consider when you build infrastructure, are you going to make sure that you understand what impacts could happen in the future?
I'd just like to add that there's been similar sorts of studies here in Hawaii to look at what infrastructure would be impacted by the various sea level rise. I think the state DOT in particular has done one of those studies.
And it's not just sea level rise impacts. We're actually starting a project with the Honolulu Board of Water Supply soon that looks at freshwater conditions under climate change in the future. So how will we have to adapt the water supply infrastructure to deal with changes in precipitation patterns and the increased sea level rise? So.
What are some other agencies that you're working with? Because you're working with Board of Water Supply, and what's really being done? Because it's from the public perspective, we don't really know.
Right. We've worked quite a bit with the Department of Land and Natural Resources. So they've been quite active in pushing to get climate adaptation written into their plans. We've worked with the Commission on Water Resources Management, CWRM. We work with water utilities. We've worked with the county water on Maui, and we're starting with Honolulu Board of Water Supply as well.
Well, Chip, what were some of the, I guess, there's so many examples of how this is happening. Is there one thing that you see that's happening right now that really surprised you?
Well, I wanted to touch on Victoria's answer regarding government agencies. There's also a legislatively mandated Interagency Climate Adaptation Committee. And this is chaired by the Office of Planning and the Department of Land and Natural Resources.
State Office of Planning.
Yeah. And the acronym is ICAC, and they meet a couple of times a year. They're sponsoring a major sea level rise workshop next month. And their goal is to deal with the issue of sea level rise for the first 3 years of their existence and produce a report by the end of 2017. And then they're going to move on to some other aspect of climate change in Hawaii, whether it's changes in precipitation or heat waves or what have you. There's so many to choose from. So on this committee are all of the state representatives from all the state agencies, from nonprofits, from counties, and from federal levels of government. So there's this very important and exciting integration of governmental levels dealing with the problem.
Is there that one finding that you have seen that really surprised you?
One finding regarding climate change in Hawaii that surprises me. I wouldn't use the word surprise, but I continue to take note of small things that occur that I connect to climate change that perhaps other people don't. For instance, the last 2 summers, in August and September, HECO has asked all of us to stop running our air conditioners at night. That were threatening the ability of the electrical grid to supply all of us with power. I, in 25 years of being in Hawaii, have never been warned by HECO before to turn off the air conditioner at night. And in fact, we never had to run the air conditioners 24 hours before. With all of the worry about solar photovoltaics and how it's stressing the grid right now, nobody is talking about the stress to the grid that heat waves can produce and the fact that people are running AC 24/7 in those late summer months and early autumn months.
And speaking of AC, I mean the calls every single summer and early fall about our children just sweating and our teachers sweating. It gets getting louder and louder.
In the schools, right? They have a major air conditioning problem, and I don't recall that discussion occurring 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
It seems to be a new one.
Bob Stanfield, someone from Mililani, Catherine, she wants to know about sea level rises in Kaka'ako. And do you know of anything specific that all of this development is doing to look at these issues specifically for Kaka'ako?
I was at the recent Hawaii Congress of Planning Officials and a presentation by CAM schools, and by Stanford Carr. They were talking about the projects they have down there, and I did ask a follow-up question about that. And they said that Hawaii Community Development Authority was requiring them to make some adaptations to their projects. It was a little unclear about the details, but that's a good question, and it's one that I intend to follow up on. Mm-hmm. But in elaborating on that, I would say that that is an opportunity to go beyond just what's required of the individual developer and do a regional planning as to how you could put together an evolving year-by-year transformation of the area as the sea level is rising. There are architects at the University of Hawaii that are specializing in climate change adaptive design, and they have some interesting ideas about how you might make those changes in Waikiki and Kaka'ako. And those presentations were also at the Hawaii Congress of Planning Officials.
Chip, I see you wanted to weigh in. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to what Bob said, that it's got to be a community effort. It can't just be one condominium tower after another deciding that they're going to adapt to the problem of sea level rise. The entire community has to be involved there.
Susan from Molokai says, our highways are near the oceans. Many of them will be inundated. If so, what's being done? Jim, what would you say to Susan?
Well, as Chip mentioned, we need a lot of shoreline revetment to try and protect the roads and the runways that are next to the sea. What we see actually in Micronesia is the heat. You were talking about the 2 degrees heat, and so these atolls are 5 degrees above the equator, and Hawaii is about 20 degrees above the equator. So as Chip mentioned, the air conditioning, but they don't have air conditioning down there, but the heat is unbearable. Absolutely unbearable. So, their infrastructure is at peril. Their ability to live on these atolls are at peril, and the heat is just compounding the effects.
And as you mentioned earlier, more people, more refugees are and will be coming to Hawaii, right?
Hawaii and Guam. There's actually, I think, twice as many Pacific Islanders on Guam from Micronesia as there are on Oahu or Hawaii. So Guam only has 170,000 people, 20,000 Micronesians. So it's a big impact on Guam as opposed to Hawaii, actually.
Well, tonight we're talking about climate change in Hawaii. Please call, email, or tweet your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 or 1-800-238-4847 if you're calling from a neighbor island. Victoria Keener, as you're studying the data, what are the impacts on animals from climate change?
Well, my group doesn't specifically do work with ecosystems, but we have a lot of partners that do, both at the state and other labs and researchers. So a lot of the issues that we've been seeing, there's actually a great study that just came out about Hawaiian birds and the impacts that that climate change is projected to have on a lot of our most endangered birds. So this is basically looking at the temperature gradient increasing as you go up in elevation. So we see that the highest elevations of our mountains warming faster than the areas near the coast. Mm-hmm. So when that elevation, which is where a lot of our native birds, where their last refuges are, when those are impacted more quickly, they're losing habitat, some of the only remaining habitat that they have. We also see impacts on freshwater stream organisms. So for example, when streams are diverted for either water supply or for agriculture, for irrigation, and they run dry, there aren't channels that are available for fish to migrate through. We also see a lot of impacts on marine ecosystems, of course. And I'm not an expert on marine ecosystems, but a lot of coral impacts. Corals are expected to bleach on an annual basis, I believe, by the 2050s, about mid-century, which makes it very hard to recover.
You know, when sort of the average Joe hears about this, it's very scary, and there's this doomsday effect. And some of our viewers want to know, what can the everyday person do about this problem? Bob, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I I think change has problems and change offers opportunities. And responding to these, we can find ways in which the adaptations actually can create value. I have joked that Honolulu eventually will become the Venice of the Pacific with the change in sea level rise. As we experience the sea level rise, it actually allows the possibility of creating water features, walkways, and a variety of characteristics that could create a better community.
Mm-hmm. When do you think Honolulu could look like Venice?
Well, it's 3 feet of sea level rise is not going to create Venice, but it may cause areas that are low to have problems with water. And one of the possibilities is to create water features. This is not pie in the sky actually on the East Coast. This is one of the responses that communities in Boston and other areas are doing in terms of their dealing with how they're going to deal with the possibility of floodwaters and having areas where floodwaters could go from storm surge. So I think those are possibilities. Your question really was what the individual person could do. I think they need to look at how are they and their organizations dealing with these risks and hazards. It's not just what's coming from climate change. We actually have exposure to coastal flooding, to coastal erosion, and high winds right now. And climate change is going to worsen those things. We need to think as a community how we deal with those. So as individuals, they need to look at how they're dealing with those risks, and their organizations that they belong to, they should raise the issue. How are we dealing with these risks, and how are we dealing with the increase in vulnerability that climate change is going to bring to those risks?
Chip Fletcher, how do you think you inspire public interest in all of this?
Well, I think job number one is raising awareness and educating the public. People are not going to be able to respond in the way that everybody at this table is calling for unless they understand the issue. Mm-hmm. So I think the way to inspire the state and the world is to raise awareness, educate them in a way that is not scary, in a way that doesn't lead them to think of the worst case scenario, but instead to emphasize that this is an opportunity. We can leave a better world, a better designed community to future generations, that it's not doom and gloom, but it does require change. Change is always hard, mm-hmm. but it's also an opportunity to improve a situation.
Jim, you've actually seen your films being used as an educational tool now. Did you expect that type of reaction?
No. So sometimes when the elected officials from Micronesia end up in Washington, D.C. lobbying for money, we found out that they were using our videos because it told a story. The other thing that what we've created, also we have another video called Vanishing Fishes. Tuna now is being eaten in Moscow, right? Tuna is eaten in Kansas City. So these ships have just literally pulled out so much tuna from these atolls that these people have lived there for 4,000 years and they're having a hard time getting fish, and that's been part of their core diet. So there's so many different ways of issues like Chip was mentioning that climate change affects, and you never think about the fish, but they're in so much demand, and so they're having a hard time even getting their own food. Victoria,
I get the sense you want to weigh in. How do you inspire the people that you're talking to really listen and look at the data?
I don't know if I can inspire, but I was going to mention that there have been studies, social science studies done that show that people have a difficult time taking personal responsibility and taking action for a problem that they see as being too big and far away from them. So, if it's a war and you hear that people are dying, people will say, that's horrible, but they don't really know what to do about it. And of course, climate change is a global problem, and it's very diffuse, and it's hard to get a handle on. So videos like the ones that Jim has done, and things that put a face on a specific problem, a person that you can see how they're being impacted. And we have this unique opportunity in the islands region. That we have all these places where people are being very specifically impacted right now. So it's a great series of films that really takes people out there and lets them see these problems as they're happening right now to people that they could know.
And I think another way is, and it relates to the question you asked earlier about how to get personally involved. What's coming to mind is an organization called Malama Manalua, which is really working to restore the health of Manalua Bay, and they've successfully removed a lot of invasive species, and they're looking at these issues. To me, the stresses that climate change is going to put on our ecosystems means that we need to really take on stewardship of these resources. We have to find ways of helping nurture and produce the best possible conditions for the bay, for the coral reefs, for the birds, the vegetation, whatever it is, that a great stress is going to be placed on them. And there are things that can be done. The scientists at Coconut Island, in my understanding, are dealing with the bleaching problem by going and looking at the areas where the coral reefs have been bleached and finding those part of those communities that have survived the bleaching, taking them back and creating nurseries for replenishing the coral reefs. So I think there's a whole host of things like that the whole community is going to have to pitch in and help take better care of our environment to help it to evolve as quickly as it's going to under these impacts.
Well, Steve from Manoa had an interesting question about our trade winds, and we all know that when there's trades, we love it. When they go away, it's pretty horrible. Steve wants to know, Chip, just what's the impact of climate change on these trades that we enjoy most of the time?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's one that we don't fully have a handle on right now. There's a lot of research being done by atmospheric scientists at the university. It has been shown that there's been a general shift from northeast to east in the directionality of the trade winds. There's been a decline in the traditional trade winds. But the data is not very long in terms of a time series. We don't know for sure if this is related to some sort of fluctuation. So he's hit on an important issue that we need to know a lot more about.
I'm guessing in those Micronesian islands that not a lot of wind down there?
Interestingly enough, many people on the atolls have actually said that the wind direction has changed and the intensity of the wind has increased. And these people have lived on these atolls for 60 years, and for them to make that kind of comment, many people say something's happening, right? Why is the wind changing? Why is the intensity greater? Why is it so hot? So they're making these observations that I don't know if they can quantify, but certainly it's their gut instinct. So we found that kind of interesting, that the wind looks like it's changing down there.
More storms as well?
More storms, more frequent droughts, extreme weather, right? Drought, some storms back and forth. And when these storms hit, they really do a damage. All the coconut trees get wiped out. They run out of their food supply. And so of the 50 atolls in Micronesia, only 8 have runways. So these other atolls, they're like 10 hours away by ship. So when a hurricane hits, it can be pretty devastating. No water, no food, no nothing, right? So these places are really isolated.
One of the projected impacts here in Hawaii is that we're going to see increased tropical cyclones. And this could occur through a number of reasons. Number one, they're calling for more El Niños and for more stronger El Niños. And we've seen this year, which was a record-setting El Niño, we've seen a record number of tropical cyclones. Also, the tropics are expanding, and tropical cyclones in Hawaiian waters typically pass to the south of the state. Well, their pathways are going to expand towards the north, and we'll see more tropical cyclones sort of intersecting with the windward sides of the islands. And if you've been paying attention over the last couple of years, there have been a number of storms sort of headed to the windward sides of the islands. And this indeed looks to be related to what's been projected by the computer models.
You know, Fred in Kahalu'u has an interesting comment and a question. He says, talk is cheap. Is there any possible and affordable mitigation programs that will protect the islands from sea level rise? Bob, did you want to take a stab at that one?
Yes, there are. It will depend on what the resource is and how valuable it is. And that will help decide what the appropriate reaction is. In some cases, the resource involved will be so valuable that we will have to protect it against the sea level rise. In other situations, the most economical, the most practical thing might be to do some adaptation, which would, say, allow for the site to be flooded every once in a while, but build in waterproofing and other features so that when the water recedes, then you can start up operations again. In other cases, it may not be worthwhile to protect, and we need to relocate back away, let the area become a marshland. So we'll have to make a series of those kinds of decisions, and we probably won't be able to protect every area. And there'll be a lot of private decisions that have to be made and a lot of public decisions. The decisions that I'm most concerned about, that I think, as public officials we have to be concerned about, is what's going to happen to our public infrastructure. It has very long life. 100 years is not unlikely for a government infrastructure to be there. And over the course of that time, you have to consider, well, is it going to be impacted by sea level rise? And what are we going to do if it is going to be? Should we protect it? Should we, which I'm hearing is, for your runways, you have no choice. You can't put them up higher someplace. You're just going to have to protect them if you want to have access. Are you going to adapt it so occasional storms come through and wash over it, then after it recedes, or are you going to relocate away from there? So we'll need to make those kinds of decisions, but I don't see it as a gloom and situation. It's something that we can say, okay, we have to do something to adapt, to put the water in some place. So how can we make that a valuable asset to the community?
Jim, when you're creating these films and doing your work down in these Micronesian islands, you saw salt on the ground in these farmlands. Can you describe what you saw?
So when the taro patches are only 10 feet above the sea level, and the sea level high tide, low tide is 3 feet, and waves washing ashore, we're seeing the salinity, the salt content of the soil increasing, and salt absorbs moisture, so it draws all your moisture away, but it's poison in the sense that the water's salty, everything is salty, the foods are salty, so you have a high sodium content, which it doesn't seem to be good for the health. So, but it's impacting everything. So University of Hawaii is working on some salt-resistant taro, but the problem with taro is you need fresh water. Mm-hmm. So, you have a salty soil that can't really grow it, and then you need all this water. So they're trying to work on dryland taro and other forms of taro right now.
And were you seeing health impacts directly on the people as they're trying to deal with this problem?
Oh yeah, I mean there's tremendous. The problem is now they switched over to rice, spam, corned beef, everything canned, right? So they're not self-sustaining anymore. So their diet has become ramen, lots of ramen, lots of salt, lots of unhealthy canned food. So their whole system has changed. Really in terms of their lifestyle, and the kids not having enough breadfruit, coconut. So the diet has changed a lot. Mm-hmm.
Victoria, are there other communities that you have seen? We see this face now in these Micronesian islands. Are there other communities that you can provide a face for our viewers out there in terms of what's going on?
In terms of non-Hawaiian?
Climate change.
Non-Hawaiian?
Mm-hmm.
Pacific Islands or just general?
Just in general.
One of the biggest faces that we're able to see is in Alaska. You know, there's a lot of coastal erosion in Alaska, and you actually have some of the first cases of actual towns crumbling, houses, infrastructure crumbling into the ocean, just going right off the edge. So they're relocating entire communities further inland, all over in Alaska from the coast. And then you see the changes that you know, these are rather isolated communities a lot of the time, so you see the impacts on the culture, the way that they interact with the rest of the community, and they're having to adapt their way of life.
Bob, someone wanted to go back to the issue of the water supply, and what are your thoughts in terms of, you know, are the counties really looking at this issue and making sure that our water supply is protected?
The Board of Water Supply has done an excellent job of looking at what the water supply, what the sources are for potable, for adopting policies and making requirements for use of non-potable water for irrigation, industrial uses, and encouraging conservation. There's actually been an amazing change in the per capita use of water, in which the population has increased, but the water usage has flattened out. So, and in addition to that, they've looked at, well, if the sources of water from the aquifer needs to be supplemented, how can we desalinate water? And they've done studies on that, and so they have a long-range plan for how they're going to deal with the water situation, but they are very concerned about the impact of climate change. They have adopted a number of policies for water conservation, and I think we could do more to protect the aquifer and to protect the quality of the water. And there's more work to be done, but it's not something that we've ignored.
Robert from Makiki wants to know, is overpopulation contributing to climate change? Chip?
Yeah, in fact, that's the ultimate problem. Right now we use 1.6 Earths, meaning that every year we're using 60% more of natural resources than can be restored by natural processes. I think I've read that a properly scaled population on this planet is around 4 billion people, but we're up beyond 7 billion people. There are projections for population growth to flatten out by mid-century, but then we need to get the population back down. Probably, you know, in everybody's mind there are catastrophic issues here, but I don't think that you know, regulating our population growth needs to be a dramatic thing. I think around the world, education of women so that they have more empowerment, more control over what they do with their bodies. They are a stronger part of the political system. I think that alone can go a long way towards curbing the rise in population. So yes, ultimately it's about population growth, and the extension from that is about what sort of a consumer society we have. And you know, if we can reduce our consumerism, if we can recycle more, if we can rely less on brand new products all the time, that would ultimately relieve some stress on our natural resources and also reduce the amount of carbon footprint that we are all responsible for.
You know, Pamela from Makawa brings up an interesting point about a plant-based diet and vegetarianism. What are your thoughts, Victoria, on this issue of methane gas in automobiles?
Yeah, that's very related to overpopulation as well. As we bring more people into a modern society, more people want more meat. And that's one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gases, and takes a lot of water to produce meat as well. I think I read a study the other day that said that in terms of carbon footprint, so the amount of carbon it takes to move goods around the globe, that it's actually less carbon intensive to eat a vegetable flown in from Argentina than it is to eat red meat grown next door. So you know, these are big choices that we have to make, and of course it's No, there are people who would say cut all meat out of your diet, but that's a big way that at the individual level people can reduce their impact on climate change as well. Just choosing to eat less meat or have a couple days where you go meat-free.
And also to choose to eat locally, eat food that is grown here in Hawaii. You know, like the Hawaii Renewable Energy Plan, it just made sense for us to have our own energy here because we're less reliant on external sources of energy, petroleum and coal that is barged in here now. We should have a Hawaii Sustainable Food Plan so that we're less reliant on food that's being barged in now. We should invest in our local farmers. We should work more strongly towards eating local. That's going to reduce our carbon footprint. It's also going to increase the security of living on these remote islands.
And we focused a lot on Oahu during this discussion. Jim, what are your thoughts on what's happening on the neighbor islands in terms of preparing for climate change?
I think every island, like Chip was alluding to, has done a very good job in studying all the coastlines. I think that's obviously the first impact. So I think we're doing a good job of understanding what's going to happen through Chip's work. Then the issue with Bob is how do you pass codes, design codes, proper rules on building new infrastructure buildings along the coastline. So I think we're on a good momentum for building infrastructure, at least having the discussion. Just a couple of years ago, no client ever even talked about climate change, but we're seeing that more and more and more now.
And I'd like to add in that the Office of Planning's Coastal Zone Management Program has a plan called the Ocean Resources Management Plan. And that plan, in its latest iteration, is very focused on responses to climate change and sea level rise. And we regularly meet monthly with the neighbor island counties and representatives from the state and federal agencies to talk about how to implement that plan. So I think that although Gary Chalk's study is for Honolulu, similar studies are going to be done for the neighbor islands about how they can incorporate rules and regulation standards into their building permit processes so that we will respond to the impact that climate change is going to have on us.
Cheryl from the Big Island wants to know, is it too late to make personal changes to mitigate the effects of climate change?
No. We're just starting.
But it's happening, and it's going to be happening.
Right. So there's a certain amount of climate change that is in play that we cannot stop. But if you love your grandchildren, if you love your children, you're going to make personal changes now so that the worst effects of climate change are not going to occur 20, 50, 100 years from now. We can get over the hump on this thing, but it's our generation. And the people that are alive today, the consumers alive today, need to reduce their consumerism. We need to reduce our carbon footprints, and our grandchildren will thank us for it.
Do you see a shift in attitude, let's say, amongst the different generations? I mean, you talk to people in their 20s, and they have a really broad view of our Earth, whereas maybe different generations have a different view?
No, I don't see it segregated by generation. I see people with all sorts of attitudes at all generations.
What about you, Victoria?
I think a lot of it depends. I mean, you do see different attitudes, but a lot of it depends on the sector that you're working in as well. Whether it's a sector that's more used to dealing with scientific results, or it's a group that's more used to working at the political level. So whether you're working with policies or whether you're working with numbers. So for example, a lot of the water utilities, not just in Hawaii, but on the mainland and around the world, are some of the most proactive in really using the climate data and starting to incorporate it actively.
Your thoughts, Jim?
On these atolls, the elders usually don't have any kids that stay. Right, so the younger generation wants to leave the atoll, So we saw a lot of kind of senior citizens that really didn't have anybody take care of them, and they don't know where else they're going to live. So I think the climate change is going to leave maybe older generation alone a bit, right? Because what's the point of living on an atoll? You don't have water, you don't have food, and you know, it's scary, right? I mean, so.
If there is one thing, Jim, that you think that someone should do right now after they watch this program, what would it be?
Boy, that's a good question. I think appreciate living on a rock island as opposed to a sand atoll. I mean, I think, you know, we all are very concerned about Oahu, Kauai, Maui, but, you know, we have elevation up to, you know, a mile in the sky, mountains, we can always move upland, you know, but on an atoll, you just got nowhere to go. So I think we have to appreciate living on a rock as opposed to a patch of sand.
Well, we certainly do, and I wanted to thank all of you for a really eye-opening discussion tonight, and hopefully we'll be discussing more of this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, next week we'll be taking the week off from Insights to showcase a special concert with one of Hawaii's most beloved performers, Jimmy Borges. Borges first publicly revealed at PBS Hawaii, that he has terminal cancer. The concert takes a look at his approach to life at this time and celebrates the life he's lived. Insights returns on January 28th, when we'll feature a revealing discussion that includes Jimmy Borges as well as retired news anchor Kirk Matthews, sharing their journey with life-threatening illness. Join the conversation as we take a first-hand look at what it truly means to face our mortality. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahialani Richardson. A hui hou.